Hi, there we go. Hi, everybody. Change of venue this week since I did the last one of these Facebook Lives. We were in South Dakota. Now I am in a place called Haley, Idaho, with nice mountains in the background and whatnot. And it's kind of sunny and great here at the moment. So, yeah, life is good. This week, Tracy, who sets these up, the prompts and the Facebook Lives and everything, had this interesting idea. Let's answer some, I guess, entry-level questions or non-programmer questions about the programming industry. What led to this is that we have this site, which I've done a couple of Facebook Lives about. It's called Make Me a Programmer. And on that site, it's for people who are kind of interested in maybe doing a boot camp or something that would get them into programming. And on that site, we produce a lot of content where we're answering questions that people have when they're kind of curious about the programming industry. So we're going to start this series where I've written a lot of the posts, so I'll do some of these, but maybe some of our other authors as well will take on questions they've answered for that site in the form of this Facebook Live, which brings us to the point of this particular installment, which is why are there so many programming languages? I wrote a post about that, I don't know, maybe a year ago. So I briefly read that back over to try to remind myself what I was talking about, but I still have the same opinions as myself from a year ago, so I guess let's get into that. Why are there so many programming languages? The first thing I did when I was answering this question was ask myself, like, are there really that many? And I went and looked it up, and the answer to the question, like how many programming languages are there, is that there's 68 programming languages that start with the letter S. So extrapolating from there, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of programming languages out there, which I think is a lot. If you're not a programmer, you might ask, like, why not just have one? Or, I don't know, 5? Why have hundreds or thousands? And I think that's a valid question. It's sort of an open-ended one that I don't think there's like a definitive answer to, but what I'll do is offer my take on that. So first of all, I'll give an answer that kind of philosophically may not be exactly what you were expecting, which is, in a sense, programming languages are kind of like products that are marketed towards people with preferences. Meaning, you could ask the question, why are there so many programming languages, like asking the question, why are there so many flavors of soda? Like, do we really need all those? Do we need whatever Mountain Dew Code Red is? Does that need to exist in the world? I guess. Somebody likes it. And so it's kind of the same thing with programming languages. There is a broad and exploding and very large market of people out there, and programmers have preferences in programming languages. They like kind of the flow of some, or the way they look, or the way they kind of feel from a productivity standpoint to use. And because there's all that varied demand out there, whenever somebody senses that maybe there's a gap in the market, or there's a way to cater to people in a way that hasn't before, kind of like a new soda flavor, there's a natural tendency to offer that up. In programming languages, it's even a little bit more pronounced, because programmers are the ones who will create the programming languages. So if you're a programmer and you don't like any existing programming language, you might just make your own and start promoting it. That isn't how most programming languages have come to be, but it is a thing that could happen. So it's weird, like, programming languages are tools, but historically they used to kind of be products, not the language itself, but the compiler, the thing that when you write code, the compiler is the thing that takes that code as input and spits out language that the computer understands. And 20 years ago, when I was learning to program, it was actually pretty common for these compilers and their languages to be sold as products. So that same kind of spirit of products has stayed over the last 20 years, even though you don't really see that anymore. Programming languages these days tend to be freely available. Whole nother topic as to why that's happened, but suffice it to say that kind of like product spirit from the beginning has stayed. So think of programming languages as products that are catering to a very, very broad market, like soda flavors. And so there's this incentive to create a lot of fragmentation to try to capture your own little corner of the world. Let's see. So I think another big component of this is what I alluded to a little bit ago, in terms of the programmers being the ones that are going to create the programming languages. If you become a programmer, if you get into programming you're going to discover that you have this new superpower when you're in what I'll call the advanced beginner stage. So in the very beginning, it's all tough and difficult. Then you hit stage 2, advanced beginner, where you're like, hey, I'm catching on to this. And you discover that you can automate anything. That's a powerful feeling. So what happens at that stage is you become aware that all of the stuff you do with a computer, you can now make it faster and cooler and more efficient. And so you start doing that. And you don't ever ask yourself in that early stage the question, has somebody done this before me? Like, should I, instead of just reinventing this wheel, should I go and just, take the wheel that exists? Over the course of time, as you get more experienced, you'll have more judiciousness here, but that tendency stays. And it's kind of, me included, it's in the mind of all programmers, where you look at the existing solutions and you're kind of like, well, I could use these, but they don't do exactly what I want, and I'll just make my own. That is prevalent. It's so prevalent that there is actually a term for it in the software world called not invented here syndrome. And as somebody who in a past life was an IT management consultant traveling around from software enterprise to enterprise, it's everywhere. Software departments have this tendency to reinvent wheels, to create their own, 50th version of something that 49 exist of. And programming languages are no exception. So in addition to this product spirit, you also have an industry that's creating them that just loves to reinvent wheels and create slightly different versions of things that exist. So those are two powerful factors. I guess a third would be tech company and corporate machinations over the years. So stay with me, and I'll give you an example. In 2020, the most popular programming language out there is JavaScript, which is, in my humble opinion, kind of a trash language, but it has become the lingua franca of the internet and of programming in general. And I'll tell you why I think of it as kind of a trash language. 25 years ago, something was going on called the browser wars. There was a company called Netscape, and then there was a company called Microsoft. And those two companies were fighting for supremacy of the brand new internet browser thing that was coming to exist. There was Internet Explorer, which you've probably heard of, although it's not common, and I think it's been retired. And then there was something called Netscape Navigator in the very early days of the internet. And also in the very early days of the internet, it was all what's called static content, meaning it was almost like a Word document. You would just create these documents that existed, and there was no interacting with them. You would just open them up, and there they'd be, and you'd read them. And in the 90s, it was the very dawn of what was called browser programming, like making the browser experience interactive. So the things you take for granted, like menus that you click and they drop down, pop-ups, type of stuff. Sidetrack with something called VB script to make that a feature of their Internet Explorer browser. Netscape was falling behind, and they were going to lose market share. Microsoft was going to roll this out, and Netscape wouldn't have that interactivity. So what did they do? They tasked a guy to come up with a programming language, JavaScript, in 10 days, which he did. He, in 10 days, created a programming language, rolled it out, named it JavaScript because Java was a popular language at the time. JavaScript had nothing to do with Java, but they just thought by naming it that, they'd piggyback on Java's popularity, and bam, we have a JavaScript, a confusingly named language created in 10 days that now the whole world runs on. So what's my point with all that is, it's not really to dump on JavaScript. You can do a lot of productive things in it. It just wasn't really built for purpose to be like a industrial grade programming language, so they built all this other stuff on top of it. But anyway, the point is you can get a programming language created for reasons like that, like Silicon Valley companies bumping heads, creating a programming language to facilitate what's known as vendor lock-in. Come use my language, and then you're going to have to kind of use all of our products and stuff. So that's another powerful driver. Big companies in Silicon Valley with R&D budgets and the whole 9 yards might just create a programming language out of whole cloth to get the inside track against a competitor, and bam, we've got programming language number 2104. So those are three big reasons. I mean, really, there's not like any kind of unifying reason that'll bring it all together. There's, varied demand out there in terms of what programmers like. There are also different categories of language that I won't go into here, but they're fit for different purposes. So you might have a set of languages that are good for like programming robots, another set that's good for creating websites, and so on and so forth. So there are categories of language that fitness for purpose drives them, but really beyond that, it's kind of the propensity of the people who create programming languages to like to reinvent the wheel, and the propensity of the people who use them to have varied tastes that people are always willing to cater to. And then, maybe I'll summarize by saying that programming itself, ever since the dawn of programming, has been a rapidly changing landscape. So you almost need this constant set of retired and new languages to keep up with the pace being driven by the industry itself. So yeah, not a nice, easily digestible answer, but one that was, fit for a 1,500 or whatever word blog post. So hopefully I've done a decent job of summarizing that. We'll keep doing some of these and make it into a series. So if you're watching this and you generally are curious about aspects of the programming world, tune in. These are going to be explanations from industry veterans that are kind of, intended for the broader audience that isn't programmers themselves. So hopefully that's been interesting. And if not, hey, hopefully the scenery's been good. It's, pretty beautiful here, I think. So I'll do a couple more videos before we head out of Idaho. And yeah, I will catch you next time. Thanks for watching.